Today on Between the Lines, considered by some to be one of our great modern-day thinkers, the world-renowned scientist and atheist Richard Dawkins. Welcome, I'm Barry Kibrick. Professor Dawkins caused a seismic shift in the study of biology with his first published book, The Selfish Gene. Later in his career, his bestseller, The God Delusion, continues to spark debate and controversy around the world. Now with his memoir, An Appetite for Wonder, we get to see the making of a scientist and what drives him to keep exploring the human condition.
I'm a writer today because I was a reader when I was 11 years old, and it was...
You do not need to prove your state of happiness to anybody.
Most of these speeches were as much as a month in preparation.
Characters, the heroes in this book, are seekers of truth in a story that involves a lot of
I
corruption.
don't get a chance to really talk about what's real, and it's the purpose for me.
Professor Dawkins, it is a pleasure to have you here on Between the Lines. Welcome, sir.
I look forward to it.
You know, the book's title is An Appetite for Wonder, and I can't help think that even though it is the main theme of the book, in a way it should be the main theme of all our lives. If our lives are not filled with an appetite for wonder, in a sense, I'll go back to the selfish, we are then just bodies carrying around genes. So, you know, we're robots carrying around genes. It is that appetite of wonder and for wonder that separates us.
You're so right, because we're so lucky to be here. The chances of our being here are so low. We're so lucky that we were ever born, and we're going to die. But before we die, we have the chance to wonder at the very fact that we're here, the universe we're in, the process that gave rise to our existence. Don't waste it.
You know, I want to be careful. I don't want to give anything away, but well, I have to give it away. The book is really a memoir up until you really published The Selfish Gene, which then became so revered not only in your field, but as in the works of all sorts of cultural explorations and things like that. But it doesn't go through a large part of the last 30 plus years, or almost close to 40 years, I would think, where you became known more for a lot of the work you did with atheism as a spokesman for it, living, you know, one of the highest spokesmen for it.
That's true, and that's coming in the second volume. This is the first of 2 volumes, and I originally signed a contract with the publisher to do the whole thing in 1 volume. But then when I got halfway through, got up to The Selfish Gene, I thought I needed a bit of a break, and I thought it would break rather naturally into 2, because the publication of my first book, The Selfish Gene, was a natural sort of watershed moment in my life. And the publishers were agreeable to splitting it in 2. So that's what you've read, is the first half.
Well, you know what's going to be interesting, because it'll allow me then, through the first half, to somehow explore a little bit what's coming into the second half. So I'm looking forward to it. But one thing that caught my mind right off the bat was the fact that The Selfish Gene, I think it was you who originally did, or was it the publisher, I'm not sure, thought it should have been called The Immortal Gene.
Yes, I went to see actually another publisher, Tom Mashlow, who was not the one who ended up publishing it. And I showed him, he read, I think, the first 2 chapters, which he liked. But he said, you can't call it The Selfish Gene. Selfish is a down word. You must call it The Immortal Gene. And in many ways, I wish I had. It would have been just as suitable a title. It fitted in with the message of the book just as well as The Selfish Gene. And if I had called it The Immortal Gene, it would not have been so vulnerable to misunderstanding. There are quite a lot of people who have read that book by title only.
That's what I was getting at.
Yeah.
And that's why when I was reading what you wrote about, because you do give us some insight into the selfish gene here, the more I read, the more I said, my gosh, this is more about the immortal gene, because you're right. If you're just reading the selfish gene, you know, like you said, more people, I forgot the exact quote, but it had something to do with everyone thinks they know about Darwinism or evolution, but really nobody does. They just know the little catch-all, and that's what happens with the selfish gene. We think, you know, well, this implies that humanity is selfish. There is no altruism. There is none of this, and none of that is really true.
No, that's absolutely right. The book is, in fact, about altruism. It's about how selfish genes make individual altruists. And so it's kind of the opposite, actually.
It is.
Yes.
And that is where, you know, what did they say? A little bit of knowledge is dangerous.
Yeah.
Because when you read more about this, and then especially as you look into some of the later things you did, like the God delusion and things like that, you say, oh gosh, this man is only thinking of self. He's not thinking outside of, you know, what might be. And I couldn't help but feel, and I want you to take no offense of this, I hope, but your appreciation for awe and wonder in many cases, for many people, would be interpreted as at least a spiritual type of a man. It's kind of funny the way we think of things nowadays, because that's when we talk about awe and wonder, oftentimes it is in the study of philosophy or in spirituality. And I was taken by the awe and wonder that you had.
I yield to nobody in my sense of wonder at the universe, and I rather resent the way the religious lobby has hijacked that idea. Actually, a scientific view of the universe fills you with awe, as nothing else can. Carl Sagan knew this, various other scientists know this. I even wrote a book called Unweaving the Rainbow, which was specifically about the poetry of science, the poetry of reality.
Let's, though, for the viewers, though, I want to go a little further and explore this. I had on two very famous physicists, Leonid Mlodinow, who wrote The Grand Design with Stephen Hawking. And again, a book somewhat that was known more for its, quote, atheistic point of view, but yet when we explored it, just like I did with Leonard, it was really, again, more about awe and wonder, not about the selfishness of man and man-only existence. I asked Leonard Susskind, who wrote also a book called The Black Hole Wars, which opposed one concept of Stephen Hawking's book on black holes, and I asked him this, and I wanted to ask you this. When he was showing me the levels of how the black hole and the Big Bang and the infinite beginning was just the quantum fluctuation, and you used the term as well in the primordial soup, that quantum fluctuation that just allows things to change, I asked him, does it still allow for one to believe in transcendence, something outside of the universe? And I joked with him, I said, I didn't mean a man because he had a white hair and a beard, I said, I didn't mean a guy in a beard sitting in a chair controlling things, but in a sense of transcendence, that something is bigger than the individual.
I'm sure there's much that's bigger than the individual, and there's much that is outside existing physics. However, I wouldn't say it's any kind of supernatural being like a god. The old man with a white beard lets them off too lightly, because everybody knows it's not an old man with a white beard. But I would want to say it's not any kind of personal being whatsoever. So that there's much that we don't yet understand. There's much that remains for physicists to grasp. But it's not going to be an intelligence. You can call it transcendent if you like, you can call it spiritual if you like, but it will not be a conscious being. It'll be something actually rather grand, probably. And I'm sure that both the physicists you talk to would agree with this. There's much.
The Grand Design was the name of the book,
design.
even, exactly.
But it's not design. It's not deliberate design. It comes about through the laws of physics, which are impersonal and purely naturalistic.
Now, I'm going to explore it further as we get down, but I want to go back a little bit, because just as you said, purely naturalistic, I want to now get back to the altruism for a second, because when we think of altruism, we do think of it as a collective sense of being, and you say there is a difference between a collective, I'll read it, versus an individual welfare, and that natural selection is purely mechanical, automatic process. Brains, and I love this, they may agonize about this, that's what we do as humans, but natural selection can't agonize about anything.
No, that's right. It has no foresight, it can't agonize, it can't think. All it does is blindly favor the individuals who are most successful at surviving and therefore reproducing. It's a simple mechanical process. Genes in the world become either less numerous in the world or or more numerous. And the ones that become more numerous are the ones that actually build bodies like us and like kangaroos and like wombats. So we are made by the genes that have been successful in the past at surviving and reproducing. Never any foresight, never any conscious deliberation until human brains came on the scene, when there is conscious deliberation. And conscious deliberation is so much a part of our makeup that we find it almost impossible to believe that it's not going on out there in nature, in the world, but it isn't.
And isn't that somehow how the word mem that you coined even comes about, is because we feel it so deeply within ourselves, even if it's just through either a repetition or whatever else it may be?
Well, I think that human consciousness is something new, and probably chimpanzee consciousness and dog consciousness is something new. And we genuinely do have the ability to foresee, to look ahead, to take whatever action might be best for us in the long-term future. But natural selection cannot do that. Natural selection can only blindly favor what is good for the short term.
Now, when you look at that, and I think, again, if people just read the title or a few of the key words, which then made me, of course, go back and look at everything because I couldn't do it. You specifically almost, I think of the ghost in the machine. You think of the gene as the ghost in the body that's going to survive, but yet you're adamantly clear that, life is for living as well as producing. There's a depth and soul, and again, I go soul. That's an interesting term again to use. Does that bother you, by the way?
I think it's very important to understand that the selfish gene tells us how we got here. But we do have big brains, and the big brains were put there by natural selection of selfish genes. But the big brains are then capable of forming purposes and goals of our own. And you can call that soul if you like. It doesn't mean it's immortal, but you can say the personality that the brain produces can set up goals and purposes of its own, which may have nothing to do with the fundamental purpose of gene survival.
You wrote about the fact that as we age, and this is in the book, our brain cells seem to, how did you put it? I should look it up exactly, but they seem to diminish.
Oh, they do.
They
yes.
diminish, right? And yet you have this craving. You almost couldn't understand why would that be the case unless there was a good reason for it. And the example you used was, you painted such a picture in my mind, was the fact that if you took, let's say, the statue David, it was just a chunk of marble, and it's the carving away of that marble that then reveals the thing of beauty behind it. I got that same, not sense, that's what you're actually saying, isn't it? That maybe there is a reason for, a purpose for this loss of brain cell. Maybe it is making room for some form of beauty or some form of something higher.
I observed the fact, which was a known fact, that brain cells die at an alarming rate every day. But I simply said maybe it's not entirely negative, just as when you make a statue, you subtract marble or stone, whatever it is, in order to make the statue. Maybe what the loss of brain cells is doing is carving out a more meaningful structure. Maybe that's how memories are stored. I'm not sure whether that's true, but it is true that in embryology, some of the embryological carving out really is that same negative process. It's called apoptosis, and parts of an embryo are actually made by cells dying selectively. So in a way, I was slightly prescient there.
You say this, and again, we've seen this in film even and whatnot. It's the butterfly's wing in China creates the tsunami in Malaysia. But you really say we owe our existence to the precise timing and placing of everything that ever happened since the universe began. And you reinforce it by saying, if a dinosaur next to a cicada tree happened to sneeze at the wrong time before he ate or didn't eat that little shrew mammal that might have been there, we may not have been here.
Yes, because the number of things that could have changed, after all, your existence owes everything to the fact that one particular sperm hit one particular egg. not only in your parents' generation, but in your grandparents' generation, your great-grandparents' generation. And anything could have upset that. I mean, there's so many different sperms, and the fact that one of them got there first determined your existence. And so many things could have changed that a sneeze 20 years before you were conceived would have had knock-on effects that would have affected which of those sperms got to which egg first.
This is a memoir, though. So let's now go back to a bit where you started, because when you were young, you were taken by, you got confirmed, our parents were, I guess, religious.
No, they weren't, actually.
Oh, they really?
My schools were religious.
Oh, but not your parents, okay.
Yeah.
And there was a poem you read, and I thought this was kind of funny, because you read it even at your father's, I think it was, funeral, and at Christopher Hitchens.
Yeah.
And it was the Balliol. Is that how you pronounce
Balliol.
it? Balliol,
yeah.
from Oxford.
Yes.
And it was a poem. And poetry is the one thing you want. You really let us know that poetry hits you in a spot that really makes you tear and well up. You've said it. Mm-hmm. Music came in a second, but never made you cry as much as good poetry.
Well, nearly as much.
Nearly
yes.
as much,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
And at the end there is the term, it says, God bless the Balliol men, and you obviously we spoke at it at Christopher Hitchens.
Yeah.
How do you feel when you use that, and then you well up again?
Yeah.
It was an interesting thought. I just had to ask you about.
Yes, well, it's a lovely poem. It's by Hilaire Belloc, and it's called "To the Balliol Men Still in Africa." It begins years ago when I was at Balliol. Balliol men and I was one, swam together in winter rivers, wrestled together under the sun. And still in the heart of us, Balliol, Balliol, loved already but hardly known. It goes on like that, and it ends up, God be with you, Balliol men. That's poetry. I don't have to actually believe in God in order to get the poetry, any more than I have to believe that Heathcliff and Cathy actually existed in order to appreciate Wuthering Heights. It's fiction, and you can be moved by fiction. And I'm moved by the fiction of Hilaire Belloc talking about God be with you, Balliol men.
Beautiful, sir. But I must let the people know, you did in the past have faith. And as you say, it was reinforced by all people. Elvis Presley.
Yeah.
So I could, when I said, okay, but the man's telling me he has faith, it just so happens that it was reinforced by Elvis Presley.
This was when I was a young boy, and I was an enormous fan of Elvis, as most of my contemporaries were. And when I saw an album by Elvis called Peace in the Valley, and it was all religious.
Because he's got that gospel.
That's where his background.
Yeah.
And why I was surprised he was religious, I don't know, but I sort of was. And because I kind of worshipped Elvis, I felt that this was a personal call to me from Elvis this was my vocation, to spread the gospel of not the Christian God. I'd grown out of the Christian God by then, but some kind of supernatural creator. It didn't last long, but for a while, I did record in my book, it's true, that Elvis kind of called me back to religion.
Sorry, I have to laugh a little about that. There's a thing that you do in here too that I have such a positive, what's the opposite of a pet peeve? When you want to do something that you don't want to do, okay? Yeah. You talk about the system at Oxford and Cambridge and the lecture system, the way it goes. And I always told my sons that you never pick a course by its subject. You pick it by its professor. You pick it by the lecturer, because the lecturer, if he's good, is going to be not telling you what you can look up in the, and by the way, now this is why I said it's not a pet peeve, I'm repeating your own thoughts here. Yeah. It is enhancing, because through, as you said, not just wisdom, but passion.
Yeah.
And that passion is so important when it comes to being inspired to have an appetite for wonder.
You should not get your facts from lectures. This is why it's a mistake, I think, for students to take notes during lectures. Take a note to remind yourself to look something up. But when I was a student, we all tried to write down something of every sentence that the lecturer uttered, and that's ridiculous because the facts are all in books anyway. You go away and you read the books, you read the papers and so on. What the lecturer should be doing is inspiring you. So you're absolutely right. Choose a course by the lecturer, not by the course itself.
By the way, I may say you were right as well.
Okay. So a really good lecturer, you can see the lecturer grasping for an idea and pulling it in and thinking aloud in front of the students and giving them an example for how to think aloud. That's what a lecture should be for. And books and nowadays the internet are for where you look up your facts.
If I can get anything across to the young people and their parents out here, I really want to get that message across, because so many people take, like you said, there's nothing you can't learn from a book, but will it inspire the passion? And you also do something, and you obviously do it on purpose. I'm going to read this exactly. Much of your work you see more as explorations of methods, not just methods of doing research, but methods of thinking. I couldn't help but associate that with the professor. It wasn't so much a matter of you proving a particular theory. It was as much as it was to open up the doors of perception. You use Huxley, in fact, in the book, the doors of perceptions for others to then follow through, which is like I'm going to do on the dying brain cells. But but that seems to be like almost a mission of yours, that your methodology was important to inspire the method of thinking.
Once again, as with the dying brain cells, you've perhaps built it up to be a little bit grander than it was.
That's my job.
I'm talking. I was talking at the time of the research I did for my doctorate, in which what I found out about the animals concerned was not earth-shaking, was not particularly important per se, but what I was trying to do was to demonstrate methods of going about research which could be used to do other things as well. So unlike, say, the Watson and Crick unraveling of the structure of DNA, which actually tells you something very important about life, about actually all life in that case, I was working on baby chicks. What I found out didn't really tell us very much about baby chicks, but what it did was to show how you can do research by what philosophers call the Popperian method of setting up a model and then deducing predictions from the model and then testing the predictions experimentally.
Well, you got to take that back then, because I am right. You did do something that is more important, in my opinion. I mean, not more important than fate. I get. All right, let's give Crick and Watson their due. DNA was a big thing, but really, allowing people to explore like that and motivating them to think that way, especially others that come after you, I don't know, that's a pretty high ground, in my opinion.
It is important to teach how to think rather than what to think.
Now, a quick one, as I say, I'll go back to your youth for a second, because there's something that still to this day gnaws at you. And I think it was at the school called Eagle, I can't remember it exactly, and you saw people being bullied.
Yes.
And you did not lift a finger to help. And you say, I'll read your words exactly, because I think this is insight to the man, which this is both insight to the man and the scientist. That's what I think is with most, well, and obviously the purpose of a memoir. I'm struggling to reconcile the child with the adult that he became. And the same struggle, I suspect, arises with most people. And then you even make a declarative statement: we are not the same people we once were. It's easy to forget that genes continue to exert their effects through our life.
Yes, we change obviously very much. I mean, we have the memories of childhood, and so we feel as though we're the same person as we were in childhood. But there is a point of view which says, because we're changing all the time, we're kind of dying all the time. So the child that you once were is now dead, but there feels like being a continuity because you still have memories of childhood. But in my case, not stepping in when somebody was being bullied, I can't imagine not stepping in now. But at the time, not only did I not step in, I don't remember even feeling much empathy. And that is now inconceivable to me. I was not the same person then. although because of the persistence of memory, in one sense I feel like the same person.
And maybe it has to do with that little immortal gene.
Nothing to do with that. No.
So, Professor Dawkins, this has been a pleasure. Our time is up. I'm going to end with this. We all can regard ourselves as exquisitely improbable, but here, in a triumph of hindsight, we are. Thank you, Professor Dawkins, for being here with us.
It's been a great pleasure. Thank you very much indeed.
It's my pleasure, and thank you all for joining us. Now, before Professor Dawkins leaves, I would like to leave you with these words from An Appetite for Wonder. It is not the facts that matter. What matters is the way in which we were encouraged to discover them. I'm Barry Kibrick. Between all the facts, stay encouraged and have an appetite for wonder. Thank you so much, Professor.
Thank you.
Closed captioning for Between the Lines with Barry Kibrick is made possible by your generous contributions to KLCS Education Foundation. Thank you for your support. Please visit us at klcs.org/BTL if you would like to contact Barry or watch an episode of our show online. And go to barrykibrickblogs.com to go further between the lines and read Barry's posts.